Picture this. I'm dragging myself up Clintwood Drive, my body screaming after a brutal 16-hour shift as an ER nurse. It's one of those full moon weekends where chaos reigns, and all I can think about is crashing into my bed and sleeping for a solid 12 hours. My name's Devon Williams, and for the past 5 years, I've called the sleepy suburb of Pinehurst home. It's the kind of place where kids ride bikes in cul-de-sacs and neighbors wave hello, charming, right? Or so I thought until I rounded the corner to my modest 2-bedroom house and froze. My front lawn looked like a flea market exploded. Tables were sprawled across the grass, piled high with my stuff, my vintage record collection I'd been curating since college, my grandmother's delicate antique tea set, even the leather jacket I scrimped for months to buy. And who's standing in the middle of this chaos, holding court like she's running a Black Friday sale? None other than Elaine Pritchard, my neighbor 2 doors down. You know the type, early 60s, bleached blonde hair, teased into that unmistakable, "Let me speak to your manager," Bob, rocking a grey sundress and sandals, grinning like she's living her best life. I blinked, certain my exhaustion was playing tricks on me, but no, this was real. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice rough from fatigue. "What the hell is going on here?" Elaine spun toward me, her smile curdling into a smirk. "Oh, you're home early," she said, like I'd crashed her party.
Early? It's 2 p.m. on a Sunday. I stepped closer, heart sinking as I saw price tags, insultingly cheap ones, slapped on my treasures. "What are you doing with my things?" I demanded. Elaine adjusted her oversized sunglasses with a
sniff. "The neighborhood has standards, Devon. Your lawn hasn't been mowed in 2 weeks, and don't get me started on those trash cans you left out last Tuesday." I could feel my blood pressure spiking. "The HOA bylaws don't give you the right to break into my house and sell my stuff,"
I snapped, fighting to keep my cool as the crowd gawked. Which city in the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you've had any run-ins with an HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel. A few yard sale.
Browsers were starting to stare. "I didn't break in," Elaine said, with indignation. "That seemed genuine. Your spare key is under that fake rock by your hydrangeas. Everyone knows that's where black people hide their keys." She said this without a hint of self-awareness about how racist it sounded. I felt my blood pressure skyrocket. First of all, that's incredibly racist. Second, that doesn't give you the right to enter my home without permission. That's when I noticed a section of tables with a large sign reading "free." My heart sank as I recognized my father's old medical books from his days as a surgeon in Chicago, his prized possession that he'd left to me when he passed away last year. Beside them was my collection of first edition James Baldwin novels that had taken me years to compile. "Oh, those things?" Elaine waved dismissively when she saw where I was looking. "No one would pay good money for those." I figured they'd at least be useful to someone as a tax write-off. I was beyond furious now. "You're giving away my father's books for free?" Well, she lowered her voice and leaned in. They were rather ethnic, not really something that fits the aesthetic of Pinehurst. My hands were trembling now, not from exhaustion, but from a rage I'd rarely felt before. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself. Making a scene wouldn't help, especially with what appeared to be half the neighborhood browsing through my life's possessions. "The sale is over," I announced loudly. "Everyone needs to leave now. These items were stolen from my home and are not for sale." The browsers looked confused, glancing between me and Elaine. "Don't listen to him," Elaine countered, her voice shrill. "He's just upset because he's not getting a cut. This is a community fundraiser. A fundraiser for what?" I demanded for the neighborhood watch to keep our streets safe from elements. The way she emphasized elements while looking me up and down told me exactly what she meant. That's when I noticed her phone in her hand. "Are you calling someone?" "My brother," she said with a smug smile. "He's a police officer in this district. He'll explain how this is all perfectly legal under civil forfeit laws." I knew she was bluffing about civil forfeit. That's not how it works at all, but the mention of her brother being a cop gave me pause. This situation was escalating quickly, and I needed to be careful. As a black man facing a white woman calling the police, I was acutely aware of how badly this could go if I didn't handle it properly. But as I surveyed the remains of my possessions being picked over by strangers and saw Elaine's satisfied smirk, I knew one thing for certain. This wouldn't end here. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I'm not just an ER nurse. I'm also someone who knows how systems work and how to work them. If Ela Pritchard wanted a war, she'd get one, but it would be fought on my terms, not
hers. I pulled out my phone and began systematically taking photos of everything: the tables, my possessions, Elaine, the free sign over my father's priceless books, the confused shoppers.
all while formulating a plan that would make Ms. Pritchard wish she'd never set foot on my property. "You'll regret this," I said quietly, more to myself than to her. She just laughed. "Oh, honey, I've dealt with your kind before. You should be thanking me for cleaning out all this clutter." Little did she know that her yard sale stunt was about to become the most expensive mistake of her life. I was still documenting the scene when a police cruiser pulled up in front of my house. Officer Richard Pritchard, I could only assume this was Ayla's brother, stepped out with a hand already resting on his holster. He had the same pinched expression as his sister, but with the added authority of a badge. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, directing the question to Elaine rather than to me, the actual homeowner. "Rick, thank goodness you're here." Elaine fluttered. "This man is disrupting our community fundraiser and threatening me." I kept my phone recording as I calmly replied, "Officer, I just finished a 16-hour shift at Pinarest Memorial ER to find this woman has broken into my home and is selling my personal belongings without permission. This is theft, breaking and entering, and possibly a hate crime given the comments she's made." Officer Pritchard barely glanced at me. "Do you have proof this is your property?" "Yes, I do. This is my house. I'm Devon Williams. I've lived here for almost 5 years. I can show you my ID with this address, and I can show you photos of these items inside my home from previous days." I reached slowly for my wallet, making sure my movements were deliberate and non-threatening. Officer Pritchard grunted, finally looking at my license when I handed it to him. "Well, Miss Pritchard says you gave her permission to organize this sale while you were at work." "That's completely false," I stated firmly. "I've never given anyone permission to enter my home or sell my belongings. In fact, I've barely spoken 3 words to Miss Pritchard in the 5 years I've lived here." Elaine's face contorted. "That's not true. We spoke just last week about this." "Oh, really?" I raised an eyebrow. "What day was that conversation? What time? What exactly did I say?" Her hesitation told me everything I needed to know. It was Tuesday, or maybe Wednesday. "You said you were overwhelmed with all your clutter and needed help organizing a sale." "I was working a double shift at the hospital both days. I have time cards to prove it. Plus, my home security camera would have recorded any conversation on my front porch." This was a bluff. I didn't actually have a security camera yet, but Elaine didn't know that. Her face fell slightly, but Officer Pritchard jumped in. "Look, this seems like a misunderstanding between neighbors. Why don't you two work it out civilly? Devon, surely you can appreciate that Ms. Pritchard was trying to help improve the neighborhood's appearance by selling my deceased father's medical books, by giving away my first edition James Baldwin collection for free. How exactly does that?"
"Improve the neighborhood's appearance, Officer Pritchard?" The officer's jaw tightened. "Watch your tone, sir. I'm just trying to resolve this situation peacefully." "So am I replied, keeping my voice level. "And peaceful resolution starts with
acknowledging that a crime has been committed here. Ms. Pritchard entered my home without permission and removed my property. That's burglary. By now, most of the yard sale browsers had scattered, uncomfortable with the confrontation unfolding. A few lingered at the edges of my lawn, probably hoping for some neighborhood drama to gossip about later. I want everyone off my property now, I stated firmly.
"And I want everything returned, including items that have already been sold." Elaine laughed nervously. "Don't be ridiculous. What's done is done. Besides, most of it was junk anyway." I turned to face her fully. "Miss Pritchard, let me be absolutely
clear. Every item you've removed from my home without permission is stolen property. Everyone who has purchased these items has received stolen goods. I will be filing a police report, not with Officer Pritchard, but with the precinct captain, and I will be pressing charges for burglary, theft, and breaking and entering. I will also be contacting my attorney about a civil suit for the value
of everything taken." That wiped the smug smile off her face. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," I replied. "I've been documenting racial harassment from you for months." Another bluff, but it hit its mark. Elaine's face peeled. Officer Pritchard stepped
between us. Now that's enough, there's no need to throw around accusations like that. I agree, I nodded. There's no need for accusations when I have evidence. I held up my phone. This entire interaction is being recorded, including Ms. Pritchard's admission that she entered my home using a spare key without my permission, and her comment about black people hiding their keys. I also have photos of her selling my clearly identifiable property. Officer, Pritchard's expression darkened. Recording an officer without consent is illegal in this state. Actually, it's not, I corrected him. This is a single-party consent state, and I'm a party to this conversation. Additionally, this is occurring in public view on my own property, where there's no expectation of privacy, but I appreciate your concern for the law, officer. Perhaps you could direct some of that concern toward the burglary that's occurred here today. I could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was realizing this situation couldn't be easily dismissed. His sister had clearly broken the law, and I wasn't going to back down. "Look," he finally said, "why don't we all take a step back? Elaine, but maybe you should start packing up these items, Mr. Williams, if you could help identify what belongs to you." "Everything here belongs to me," I stated firmly, "and I'll need a list of names and contact information for everyone who purchased items today so I can arrange for their return." Elaine sputtered, "I don't have that information. People paid cash." "Then you'll be personally responsible for reimbursing me for everything sold," I replied. "I have detailed documentation and insurance appraisals for most of my valuable collections." As this exchange continued, I noticed a woman watching from across the street. She had been recording the entire scene on her phone. I recognized her as Mrs. Chen, a retired civil rights attorney who had moved to the neighborhood last year. She gave me a subtle nod, which bolstered my confidence. I wasn't alone in this fight. Officer Pritchard noticed my glance and turned to see Mrs. Chen as well. His posture changed immediately. "All right, let's handle this properly, Miss Pritchard. I'm going to need you to provide a statement about how you came to be in possession
of Mr. Williams' property." Elaine's face crumpled with betrayal. "Rick, you can't be serious." "We'll discuss this later," he muttered to her. Then, louder to me, "Mr. Williams, you'll need to come down to the station to file a formal complaint." I nodded. I'd be happy to. "After my shift at the hospital, I treated 3 of your colleagues in the ER. I'm sure they'd be interested to hear about today's events." That wasn't a bluff. The thin blue line works both ways.
Officers take care of their own, but they also don't appreciate other officers bringing heat on the department, and Officer Pritchard was definitely about to bring heat. As Elaine began sullenly packing up my possessions, I knew this was just the beginning. The yard sale disaster was going to cost her far more than she could imagine, not just financially, but in ways that would make her regret ever setting foot on my property, because while she saw me as just another black man she could harass with impunity, what she didn't know was that I had spent years building connections, understanding systems, and preparing for people exactly like her. The game was just beginning, and I was playing for keeps. That evening, after securing what remained of my possessions and filing a police report with a sergeant who was notably more professional than Officer Pritchard, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and a very large cup of coffee. Exhaustion pulled at my eyelids, but adrenaline and righteous anger kept me wide awake. It was time to plan my response. I'm not a vindictive person by nature. My work as an ER nurse has taught me compassion and patience in the face of difficult people. But Elaine Pritchard had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She had invaded my home, stolen my belongings, and attempted to erase my heritage by giving away my father's books and my collection of black literature. Then she'd called her brother to intimidate me on my own property. This wasn't just about getting my stuff back. This was about ensuring the Pritchards understood there were consequences for their actions. I pulled out my phone and called my college roommate, Anthony Reeves, now a partner at a prestigious law firm specializing in civil rights cases. "Devon, it's midnight, man. Everything okay?" Anthony answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Sorry for calling so late, but I need your advice on something that can't wait." I proceeded to explain the day's events, my voice occasionally catching with emotion when I described my father's books being given away for free. By the end of my story, Anthony was fully awake and furious, those racist pieces of "I'm coming down there tomorrow." "This is exactly the kind of case we live for. I don't want to put you out. Devon, stop. Remember when you stayed up for 3 days straight helping me study for the bar exam while working full-time? This is me returning the favor. Plus, Pritchard needs to learn that she can't pull this in 2025 and get away with it. After hanging up with Anthony, I made a few more calls. First, to Dr. Leticia Jules, the hospital administrator, who had become something of a mentor to me. Then to Jerome Banks, my cousin who worked for the local news station as a producer. Finally to Mrs. Chen across the street, thanking her for being a witness and asking if she might be willing to provide her recording, if needed. With my immediate support network activated, I turned to research. Elaine Pritchard, it turned out, was not just my unpleasant neighbor. She was the vice president of the Pinerist Homeowners Association, a board member at the local country club, and most interestingly, the volunteer coordinator for Councilman Henry Blackwood's re-election campaign. Officer Richard Pritchard had his own history worth noting: 3 civilian complaints for excessive force, all involving black or Hispanic subjects. No disciplinary action had resulted, but the pattern was clear enough. He'd also recently been featured in the local paper for his community outreach work, a program teaching kids about respecting authority that was implemented exclusively in predominantly minority schools. I smiled grimly as I jotted down notes. The Pritchards had built their lives on a foundation of respectability and community standing. They presented themselves as pillars of society while harboring barely concealed racism and abusing their positions of power. That foundation was about to crumble. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Williams, this is Peter Chen, Amelia's husband. My wife told me about what happened today. I'm on the City Council Ethics Committee. Would like to speak with you tomorrow if possible." Another piece falling into place. I texted back my thanks and agreement. I'm not usually one for plotting revenge. But as the night deepened and my plan took shape, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. This wasn't just about vengeance, it was about justice, about standing up, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been targeted by people like the Pritchards and found themselves without the resources or connections to fight back. By dawn, blurry-eyed but resolute, I had my strategy mapped out. It would take time, patience, and precision, but if executed correctly, it would ensure the Pritchards never again felt empowered to terrorize their neighbors. I finally allowed myself a few hours of sleep, setting my alarm for 10 a.m. When I woke, I had 17 missed calls, 5 from unknown numbers, 3 from my supervisor at the hospital, 2 from Anthony, and 7 from a number I recognized as belonging to Elaine.
Pritchard.
I listened to her voicemails with increasing satisfaction. "Mr. Williams, this is Ela Pritchard. I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday. Perhaps we could discuss this like adults. Mr. Williams, please call me back. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that satisfies both parties. Devon, may I call you Devon? I'm willing to compensate you for any items that may have been sold by mistake. This is becoming ridiculous. My brother is a police officer, and you're making serious
Accusations that could damage his career.
Please, Mr. Williams, I've spoken with my attorney and he suggests we can resolve this without further escalation. I've left several messages. Your silence is very unprofessional. I'm trying to make this right. I don't appreciate being ignored. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have friends in this community, important friends. You'd be wise to remember that." That last message made me smile. She was right about one thing. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I showered, dressed in my most professional outfit, and prepared for my first meeting of the day, lunch. With Councilman Blackwood, Dr. Jules had arranged it, calling in a favor from her days volunteering on his first campaign. The councilman was facing a tough re-election battle and couldn't afford any scandals, especially ones with racial overtones. As I drove to the restaurant, I recalled something my father used to tell me. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but justice should be served promptly and in full view of everyone affected by its absence. The Pritchards were about to learn the difference between revenge and justice, and why the latter is so much more devastating. My phone rang through my car speakers. It was Anthony. "I just got out of court and I'm heading your way, but Devon, there's something you should know before your meeting with Blackwood. I did some digging into Elaine Pritchard's history with the HOA. This isn't the first time she's pulled something like this. 3 other homeowners, all minorities, have reported similar incidents. None pressed charges because they were intimidated by her brother, but they're willing to come forward now." I felt a cold fury building inside me. So this was a pattern. Elaine targeted minorities in the neighborhood, using her brother's badge as a shield. It was time someone stood up to both of them. "Send me their contact information," I replied.
"And Anthony, thanks for having my back." "Always," he said. "See you in 2 hours. Don't start the dismantling of the Pritchard dynasty without me." I pulled into the restaurant parking lot, took a deep breath, and stepped out into the bright May sunshine.
Phase 1 of Operation Justice was about to begin. Councilman Henry Blackwood was exactly what you'd expect from a career politician. Perfectly coiffed salt and pepper hair, a firm handshake, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We were seated at a quiet corner table at Riverside Bistro, the kind of place where deals are made over $30 salads and $15 iced teas. "Dr. Jules speaks very highly of you, Mr. Williams," Blackwood began after we'd ordered. "She says you're one of the finest nurses in the emergency department." "She's too kind," I replied modestly. "And please call me Devon." "Devon it is. Now, Letitia mentioned you had a concerning incident in our community that I should be aware of." I laid out the events of the previous day in careful, measured tones, making sure to emphasize the racial components without seeming like I was playing the race card. Politicians like Blackwood understood optics above all else. I have documentation, I added, sliding my phone across the table to show him the photos and videos. Ms. Pritchard admitted to entering my home without permission and made several racially charged comments. When I objected, she called her brother, Officer Pritchard, who attempted to intimidate me rather than addressing the actual crime. Blackwood's political smile had vanished entirely by the time he handed my phone back. This is troubling, very troubling. Miss Pritchard has been a valuable
volunteer for my campaign. I'm aware. I nodded. That's partly why I wanted to speak with you directly. I believe you're a man of integrity, Councilman. I wouldn't want your reputation tarnished by association with someone who engages in this kind of behavior. He cleared
his throat uncomfortably. What exactly are you planning to do with this information, Devon? That depends, I replied honestly. I've filed a police report and engaged an attorney, but my primary concern isn't financial compensation. It's ensuring this doesn't happen to anyone else in our community. I took a sip of water before continuing. My cousin works at Channel 7 News. He's expressed interest in covering this story. Apparently they've been working on a series about racial profiling and abuse of power in suburban communities. Blackwood's face paled slightly. I see, but, I added, I've held off on making any decisions. I wanted to speak with you first, given Miss Pritchard's connection to your campaign. The councilman nodded slowly, calculating. I appreciate your discretion. Of course, I can't condone this type of behavior from anyone associated with my office or campaign. I'll be speaking with Ms. Pritchard immediately. I thought you might, I agreed, though I should mention that my attorney has uncovered similar incidents involving Ms. Pritchard and other minority homeowners in Pinehurst. It seems to be a pattern rather than an isolated incident. This was the moment of truth. Would Blackwood distance himself to save his own skin, or would he try to protect his valuable campaign volunteer? He sighed heavily, reaching for his phone. If you'll excuse me for a moment, I need to make a call. Of course. While he stepped away from the table, I received a text from Anthony. Just met with the other victims. Their stories are nearly identical to yours. One even has security camera footage. We're building a solid case. When Blackwood returned, his expression was grim but resolved. I've spoken with my campaign manager. Miss Pritchard has been removed from her position effective immediately. We'll be issuing a statement condemning any form of discrimination or harassment in our community. That's commendable, I acknowledged. Additionally, he continued, leaning forward, I'd like to personally apologize for your experience. This isn't what Pinehurst stands for. I'm establishing a community oversight committee to review practices within both the HOA and our local police department, with a focus on ensuring equal treatment for all residents. I'd be honored if you'd consider serving on it. I hadn't expected this. Blackwood was smarter than I'd given him credit for. He was turning a potential scandal into a political opportunity. Still, the outcome aligned with my goals. I'd be happy to participate, I replied. Though I hope you understand, I still need to pursue legal action against Ms. Pritchard and potentially the police department. Of course, he nodded. The rule of law must be respected. He paused, then added, would it be possible to keep my campaign's swift response in mind when discussing this matter publicly? I smiled. Absolutely, Councilman. Credit where credit is due. After lunch, I met Anthony at his law firm's local office. He'd brought together 3 other Pinehurst residents who had experienced similar treatment from Ella Pritchard. Maria Gonzalez, a pediatrician who had found Elaine removing unsightly potted plants from her front porch, James Kim, a professor whose unauthorized backyard vegetable garden had been destroyed while he was at a conference, and Aisha Patterson, an elderly woman whose decades-old collection of African art had been removed from her front windows because it decreased property values. "This is a clear pattern of targeted harassment," Anthony explained as we reviewed their statements. "Ms. Pritchard has been using her position in the HOA to specifically target homeowners of color, and her brother has been using his badge to intimidate anyone who complains." "Do we have enough for a class action?" I asked. Anthony grinned. "More than enough, but that's not all." He pulled out a folder. "Remember Mrs. Chen, your neighbor, who recorded yesterday's incident? Her husband sits on the City Council Ethics Committee. He's provided me with some very interesting documents." The documents revealed that Officer Pritchard had failed to recuse himself from at least 7 incidents involving his sister over the past 3 years. In each case, complaints against Elaine were dismissed without investigation. More damning still, Elaine had leveraged her relationship with the police department to have parking tickets and minor violations dismissed for her friends in the HOA and country club. "This goes beyond harassment," Anthony said gravely. "This is systematic abuse of power. The police chief has already contacted me for a meeting tomorrow. I think they're worried about a department-wide investigation." "Good," I replied. "They should be." By late afternoon, my phone was buzzing constantly. Councilman Blackwood had indeed issued a statement condemning discrimination and announcing the formation of the Oversight Committee. The local news had picked up the story, though they hadn't named me specifically yet. The police department had released a terse statement about investigating allegations of impropriety, and the HOA board had called an emergency meeting for that evening. Most satisfying of all was a text from Mrs. Chen. "Elaine just stormed out of her house with suitcases. Looks like she's going somewhere in a hurry." I smiled. Phase 1 was complete. The evidence was public and the pressure was building, but I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Phase 2 would hit the Pritchards where it really hurt, their reputations
and their wallets. As evening fell, I received an unexpected visitor, Officer Richard Pritchard himself, standing on my front porch without his uniform or his usual swagger.
"Mr. Williams," he said stiffly when I opened the door. "May I come in?" "I don't think that would be appropriate, Officer Pritchard," I replied, leaving the storm door closed between us. "But I'm happy to hear what you have to say." He cleared his throat. "I've been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. My sister has been removed from the HOA board and banned from Councilman Blackwood's campaign. Our family has been in this community for 3 generations, and in one day you've managed to destroy everything we've built." "I didn't destroy anything."
"Officer Pritchard," I corrected him calmly. "Your actions and your sister's actions did that. I'm simply ensuring there are consequences for those actions."
"What do you want?" he asked bluntly. "Money? An apology? Name it, and let's end this." I studied him for a moment. He didn't get it. He still thought this was something he could make disappear with the right combination of words or dollars. "What I want," I said finally, "is justice. Not just for me, but for every person in this community who has been harassed, intimidated, or made to feel unwelcome because of the color of their skin. What I want is systemic change that ensures no one else experiences what I and others have."
"Experienced? That's not realistic," he scoffed. "Perhaps not," I conceded, "but we're going to get as close to it as possible, starting with you and your sister facing the full legal consequences of your actions." As he turned to leave, shoulders
"Slumped in defeat," I added.
"Oh, and Officer Pritchard, You might want to tell your sister that the 100% off items she was so generously giving away, the first edition Baldwin collection alone was appraised at $75,000 last year. I'll be expecting full restitution. The look on his face as that number registered was almost worth everything I'd been
through. Almost. The next week unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated symphony of consequences. Every morning brought new developments, each more satisfying than the last. Monday began with a formal apology from the Pinehurst Police Department, delivered by the chief herself on my doorstep. Chief Gloria Martinez was a non-nonsense woman with 25 years on the force and a reputation for integrity. Mr. Williams, on behalf of the department, I want to personally apologize for Officer Pritchard's
conduct.
His actions do not reflect our values or training. She handed me an official letter on department letterhead. I've initiated a full internal affairs investigation into both this incident and Officer Pritchard's prior conduct. He'll remain on administrative leave until it's complete. I accepted the letter with a nod. I appreciate that, Chief Martinez. Will the investigation include reviewing other cases where Officer Pritchard responded to calls involving his sister? It will now, she replied grimly. Your attorney provided some concerning documentation that we're taking very seriously. We're also reviewing all civilian complaints against Officer Pritchard for potential patterns. After she left, I checked my email to find a message from the HOA board. They had voted unanimously to remove Elaine Pritchard, not just from her vice president position, but from the board entirely. Additionally, they were implementing new guidelines requiring documented homeowner consent before any HOA representative could enter private property for any reason. By Tuesday, the local news story had gone viral. My cousin Jerome had produced a segment that was picked up by national outlets, focusing on the pattern of harassment against minority homeowners in supposedly progressive suburbs. He'd been careful to present me as just one of several victims, rather than the orchestrator of the Pritchards' downfall, which was exactly what I wanted. Wednesday brought the first legal victories. Anthony called to inform me that the district attorney was considering criminal charges against both Pritchard's burglary and abuse of power, respectively. Meanwhile, our civil case was proceeding smoothly, with the judge denying Elaine's motion to dismiss and setting an expedited discovery schedule. The best part, Anthony chuckled, is that Elaine's homeowner's insurance is refusing to cover her legal costs. They're citing an exclusion for intentional criminal acts. She's having to pay out of pocket, and her attorney isn't cheap. Thursday was perhaps the most personally satisfying day. A courier delivered a large box to my door containing most of my father's medical books and my Baldwin collection. They'd been recovered from various buyers after Elaine, under threat of prosecution for trafficking in stolen goods, had provided a list of everyone who had taken items from the yard sale. Each book was accompanied by a handwritten apology from its temporary possessor. There was also a check, a very large check, from Elaine Pritchard, covering the appraised value of items that couldn't be recovered, plus additional damages for emotional distress. Anthony had negotiated the settlement, making it clear that this payment was merely the beginning, not the end, of our legal actions. Friday brought news that Officer Pritchard had resigned from the police force rather than face termination after the internal investigation uncovered numerous procedural violations and evidence of bias. According to my contacts in the department, he'd also been referred to the state licensing board, which could prevent him from being hired as an officer elsewhere. By the weekend, I finally allowed myself to relax a bit. I spent Saturday reorganizing my recovered possessions and replacing what couldn't be recovered. My father's worn leather medical dictionary, his first purchase after being accepted to medical school, was among the returned items. I ran my fingers over the embossed gold letters.
of his name and felt a weight lift from my chest.
On Sunday, neighbours began stopping by, not to gawk or gossip, but to express support and in some cases share their own stories of encounters with the Pritchards. Mrs. Chen brought homemade dumplings. The Rodriguez family from down the block brought a fruit basket. Dr. Jules stopped by with a bottle of excellent scotch. To Justice, she toasted when we each had a glass. To Community, I countered, clinking my glass against hers. Later that evening, as I sat on my front porch, watching the sunset, a black Lexus pulled up in front of my house. A woman I didn't recognize emerged, elegant in her early 30s with a professional bearing. "Mr. Williams?" she approached cautiously. "I'm Vanessa Pritchard, Richard and Elaine's niece." I tensed immediately, but she raised her hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to cause trouble." "Quite the opposite," she said, her voice carrying none of the entitlement I'd come to associate with the Pritchard name. "May I join you? I think we should talk." I gestured to the empty chair beside.
Me?
She sat gracefully, though I could sense her discomfort. "I want to apologize for my aunt and uncle's behavior," she began. "Their actions were inexcusable, and I'm deeply ashamed to be associated with them right now." "I appreciate that," I replied, cautiously. "But may I ask why you're here?" An apology could have been sent in a card. Vanessa smiled sadly. "I'm an assistant district attorney in Hartford. I specialize in civil rights cases." She handed me her business card. When I heard what happened, not from my family, of course, but from former colleagues here, I was horrified but not surprised. My aunt and uncle have always been problematic. The rest of the family has enabled their behavior for too long. I studied
Her card. It seemed legitimate. "So this is what a professional courtesy visit?" "No," she shook her head. "It's more personal than that."
I've spent my career fighting against exactly the kind of discrimination my own family members have been perpetuating. I needed you to know that not all Pritchards share their views. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. I also wanted to return this. It was my grandfather's. He was a doctor, too. Aunt Elaine gave it to me last week, claiming she'd found it at an estate sale. When I saw the name inside, she handed me my father's journal from medical school. I took it with trembling hands, opening to the first page where he'd written his name and the date. September 1975, his first day of classes. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. This means more than you know." "I thought it might," she replied softly. "Listen, Mr. Williams, Devon, please. Devon, what my aunt and uncle did was wrong on every level. But I want you to know that your response using the system to hold them accountable rather than seeking personal revenge has made an impact beyond just them. The police department is implementing new training. The HOA is reviewing its policies. Even the country club, that bastion of old money and older prejudices, is establishing a diversity committee. I hadn't expected this. That's good to hear. The reason I'm telling you this is because I've been asked to lead a community task force on addressing systemic bias in Pinarest institutions. Councilman Blackwood recommended you as a co-chair." She smiled at my surprised expression. "You've earned a reputation as someone who fights for justice with integrity. We could use your perspective as the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple." I found myself in the unexpected position of discussing community healing with a Pritchard. Life truly was full of ironies. "I'll think about it," I promised. "No offense, but I've had my fill of Pinarest politics for now." "Of course," she nodded, standing to leave. "Take your time. And Devon, for what it's worth, I'm glad you fought back. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way." As her car pulled away, I reopened my father's journal, finding comfort in his familiar handwriting. The final entry, dated just weeks before his death, read, "Remember that justice without compassion becomes vengeance, but compassion without justice becomes complicity." Wise words from a wise man. I'd sought justice, not vengeance, and perhaps now compassion could enter the equation as well. The weeks following what locals had taken to calling the yard sale incident were a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. I took a much-needed week off from the hospital, using the time to restore order to my home and my life. The process was both practical and symbolic, reclaiming my space after it had been violated. Anthony kept me updated on the legal proceedings. Ella Pritchard had agreed to a substantial settlement rather than face a lengthy and public trial. The terms included not just financial compensation but also required Antibious training and community service hours. Richard Pritchard was facing his own legal troubles with the police union, declining to provide representation after reviewing the evidence of his misconduct. "They're making an example of him," Anthony explained during one of our regular update calls. "The department can't afford to look like they tolerate this kind of behavior, especially with the current political climate. Do you think anything will actually change?" I asked skeptically. "Some things already have," he pointed out. "The HOA has completely revised their bylaws. The police department is implementing new training protocols and community engagement initiatives. Blackwood's oversight committee is gaining traction." He was right. Of course, there had been tangible improvements, but I couldn't help wondering if they were merely superficial changes designed to manage public relations rather than address the underlying issues. My doubts were interrupted by a knock at the door. I opened it to find a delegation of neighbors on my porch: Mrs. Chen, the Rodriguez family, the Patels from across the street, and several others I recognized but didn't know well. "We hope we're not interrupting," Mrs. Chen said, "but we wanted to speak with you about something important." I invited them in, somewhat bewildered by the impromptu neighborhood gathering in my living room. Once everyone was settled, Mrs. Chen continued as their apparent spokesperson. "We formed a neighborhood association," she explained, "not to replace the HOA, which handles maintenance and common areas, but to focus on community building and mutual support." Mr. Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. "After what happened to you, many of us realized we didn't really know our neighbors. We live side by side, but rarely connect in meaningful ways. We've already had our first event," Mrs. Patel added, "a multicultural potluck in the park. Over 60 people attended." Mrs. Chen handed me a folder. "We'd like you to consider joining our steering committee. Your experience and perspective would be valuable." Inside the folder was a mission statement for the Pinehurst Community Alliance, along with planned activities, resource-sharing initiatives, and a neighborhood watch program designed specifically to protect vulnerable residents from harassment or discrimination. I was touched by their initiative and inclusion, but still hesitant. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm the right person. I've only lived here for 5 years and I work such irregular hours." "That's exactly why we need you," Mrs. Chen insisted. "You represent a different demographic than many long-time residents, and your professional experience as someone who helps people in crisis is exactly the perspective we need." Their earnestness was persuasive. These weren't people seeking a figurehead or token. They genuinely wanted to build something meaningful from the ashes of division. "I'll help however I can," I finally agreed. The group broke into smiles and relieved.
"Thanks." As they left, Mrs. Rodriguez pressed a container into my hands.
"My grandmother's a rose cono," she explained. "Food heals the soul." She wasn't wrong. That night, as I enjoyed the delicious meal, I reflected on how quickly things had changed. A month ago, I'd barely spoken to most of my neighbors. Now, we were building a community together. The next morning brought another unexpected visitor, Dr. James Harrison, the Chief of Emergency Services at Pinarest Memorial. "Devon," he greeted me with his usual brisk efficiency. "May I come in? I have a proposition for you." Over coffee, Dr. Harrison outlined his visit's purpose. The hospital board has created a new position, Director of Community Health Engagement. The role would involve developing programs to better serve underrepresented populations, address healthcare disparities, and build stronger connections between the hospital and the neighborhoods we serve. I raised an eyebrow. "And you're telling—"
Me this because we want you to consider taking the position, he replied matter-of-factly. Your handling of the recent unpleasantness demonstrated exactly the qualities we're looking for.
integrity, strategic thinking, commitment to equity, and the ability to navigate complex systems to affect change. I nearly choked on my coffee. "You're offering me an administrative position based on how I handled a neighbor stealing my stuff?" Dr. Harrison chuckled. "I'm offering you a leadership position based on how you transformed a personal injustice into community-wide progress. Plus, your clinical reputation is stellar. The ER staff would riot if I tried to poach you completely, which is why this would be a part-time role alongside your nursing duties." He slid a folder across the table containing a job description, salary details, impressive, and a personal note from the hospital CEO expressing her support for my candidacy. "Think about it," Dr. Harrison said, standing to leave. "Health C Care needs leaders who understand both medicine and justice. You've proven yourself capable of both." After he left, I sat, stunned, reviewing the offer. The position would mean fewer clinical hours but more influence over systemic issues. It wasn't a path I'd considered for my career, but now that it was, before me, I could see the potential impact. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa Pritchard. "Community Task Force meeting scheduled for next Tuesday. Still hope you'll consider joining us." I hadn't given her offer much thought, but now it seemed to align with these other opportunities. Perhaps this was the universe's way of pushing me toward a new chapter, one where I could help prevent injustices rather than just respond to them. Over the following days, more pieces fell into place. Councilman Blackwood's office contacted me about serving on the Oversight Committee. The local NNACP chapter invited me to speak at their monthly meeting about addressing systemic bias in suburban communities. A regional news program requested an interview about turning personal adversity into community advocacy. I accepted some offers and declined others, trying to balance my new public role with my need for privacy and my demanding work schedule. Through it all, I continued my shifts at the ER, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of patient care, amidst so much change. One quiet night shift, as I was checking on a sleeping elderly patient, her granddaughter approached me. "You're him, aren't you?" she asked softly. "The nurse who stood up to those horrible people in Pinarest?" I nodded reluctantly, still uncomfortable with being recognized. "My grandmother lives in Pinarest too," she explained. "She's been there for 40 years but always felt unwelcome. She told me things have been different lately. People speak to her. At the grocery store now, a neighbor offered to help with her yard work. The HOA actually responded to her maintenance request." She squeezed my arm. "Thank you for that." After she left, I stood by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. What had begun as a personal fight for justice had rippled outward in ways I never could have predicted. Lives were being touched, systems were being examined, communities were being strengthened. My father would have been proud. He'd always taught me that true healing couldn't happen without addressing the underlying causes of pain. In my professional life, I'd applied that principle to physical ailments. Now I was applying it to social ones as well. As dawn broke over the horizon, I made my decision. I would accept the hospital position, join Vanessa's task force, and continue. working with the Pinehurst Community Alliance not because I sought recognition or influence, but because I had the opportunity to transform an ugly incident into meaningful change. That afternoon, I returned home to find a small package on my doorstep. Inside was a framed photograph of my father in his white coat, smiling proudly on his first day as chief of surgery. I didn't recognize the frame, but I immediately recognized the handwriting on the enclosed note. Found this while cleaning out Aunt Elaine's storage unit. Thought it belonged with you. Some debts can never be fully repaid, but acknowledgement is a start. V. Pritchard. I hung the photo in my living room, a reminder that justice, recovery, and even forgiveness are ongoing processes, not destinations to be reached, but paths to be traveled with intention and integrity. 1 year to the day after finding Ayla Pritchard selling my possessions on my front lawn, I stood at a podium in Pinehurst Community Park addressing a crowd of over 300 residents. Behind me, a banner proclaimed the first annual Unity in Community Festival, organized jointly by the Pinehurst Community Alliance and the newly reformed Homeowners Association. A year ago I experienced firsthand how quickly neighbors can become strangers and how easily prejudice can masquerade as community standards. But today we celebrate a different vision of community, one built on mutual respect, genuine inclusion, and the recognition that our diversity is our strength. The crowd applauded, and I could see the genuine enthusiasm in their faces. This wasn't just performative. Real change had taken root in Pinehurst. The festival around us was evidence of that transformation. Food booths featuring cuisines from around the world lined the perimeter of the park. Children raced between activity stations offering everything from traditional games to modern STEM challenges. Local artists and craftspeople displayed their work, and most significantly, people from all backgrounds were mingling freely, engaged in the kind of authentic connection that had been sorely lacking before. After my brief remarks, I stepped down to make way for the next speaker, Councilman Blackwood. Now Mayor Blackwood, after winning the election on a platform of inclusive governance and community revitalization. Devon Williams embodies the change we've been working toward, he announced, to enthusiastic applause. His leadership on our Community Oversight Committee has helped establish Pinehurst as a model for suburban equity and inclusion. The policies we've implemented based on his recommendations have been recognized by the state governor and are being adapted by other communities facing similar challenges. I shifted uncomfortably under the praise. While I appreciated the recognition, I was always careful to emphasize that the changes in Pinehurst hadn't been my work alone. They represented the collective effort of many dedicated residents who had seized the opportunity to build a better community. As the day progressed, I moved through the festival, greeting neighbors who had become friends and colleagues in our shared work. Mrs. Chen, now the president of the Pinehurst Community Alliance, was demonstrating calligraphy to an enthusiastic group of children. Dr. Jules was staffing the hospital's free health screening booth. Anthony was providing Pruno legal consultations under a tent emblazoned with Know Your Rights. Even Vanessa Pritchard was there, coordinating the Civil Rights Task Force's educational display. We developed an unlikely alliance over the past year, finding common ground in our commitment to systemic change. Her insider knowledge of institutional barriers combined with my frontline experience had proven to be a powerful combination. Quite a turnout, she observed as I stopped by her booth. Even my uncle showed up. I followed her gaze to where Richard Pritchard stood at the edge of the festival. No longer an officer, he'd found work as a security consultant, and at Vanessa's insistence, had undergone extensive amphibious training. Our paths rarely crossed, but when they did, there was a wary mutual respect. Not friendship, some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, but a civil acknowledgement of each other's humanity. "And my aunt sent this," Vanessa added, handing me an envelope. She asked me to give it to you personally. Inside was a handwritten letter from Elaine Pritchard, now living in Arizona with her sister. She expressed regret for her actions, acknowledged the harm she'd caused, and detailed the work she was doing to address her own biases through therapy and education. It wasn't quite an apology. Some people never get there, but it was a recognition of wrongdoing, which was more than I'd expected. "Progress comes in many forms," I murmured, tucking the letter away. As evening fell, local musicians took the stage, filling the park with a fusion of jazz, R&B, and global rhythms. Families spread blankets on the grass. Neighbors shared food and conversation. The community that had once been divided by invisible but powerful boundaries was coming together in visible and meaningful ways. Dr. Harrison found me watching the scene with satisfaction. "The hospital board is thrilled with your work as director of community health engagement," he informed me. "The partnership programs you've developed have increased preventive care visits among underserved populations by 43% and reduced emergency room visits for chronic conditions by 25%. The programs are working because we designed them with the community, not for them." I pointed out, people know when they're truly being included versus when they're being checked off a diversity list. He nodded thoughtfully. "That's why we're looking to expand your role. The board is considering creating a vice president of community health and equity position. Your name is at the top of the list." It was yet another unexpected opportunity born from that terrible day, a year ago. My professional trajectory had been completely reshaped, not away from patient care, but toward addressing the social determinants that so often brought patients to the ER in the first place. As the festival wound down, I found myself sitting on a park bench with Mrs. Chen, watching the cleanup crews, all volunteers from the neighborhood, working efficiently together. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked, gesturing at the scene before
us. "When you were fighting the Pritchards, did you think it would lead to all of this?"
I considered her question carefully. "No," I admitted. "I was just trying to get justice for myself. I never anticipated how many other people had experienced similar treatment, but felt powerless to fight back. I didn't realize how much tension was simmering beneath the surface of our nice neighborhood. Sometimes it takes one person willing to stand up to show others it's possible," she observed. "You gave people courage." "And they gave me community," I replied. "That's been the most
unexpected gift in all of this."
I've lived in Pinarest for 6 years, but I've only felt at home here for the past 1. Later that night, as I walked the short distance from the park to my house, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The painful incident that had started, it all had been transformed into something powerful and positive, not just for me, but for an entire community. My phone buzzed with a text from Jerome. "Segment on Pinarest's transformation airing next week. National pickup likely. Proud of you," because I smiled, recalling my father's words about justice and compassion. He would have been amazed to see how his wisdom had manifested in ways none of us could have predicted. As I approached my house, I noticed something new, a small community library box installed at the edge of my property. It hadn't been there when I left for the festival that morning. Curious, I opened it to find it already stocked with books, mostly works by Black authors, including several by James Baldwin. A note inside the front cover of "Go Tell It on the Some Mountain" read, "For the man who taught Pinarest that stories
matter, especially the ones we've been ignoring, your neighbors." I stood there in the quiet night, book in hand, overwhelmed by the simple gesture. From violation to vindication to transformation, the journey had been challenging, but the destination
was well worth it. Tomorrow would bring new patients to care for, new initiatives to develop, new barriers to break down. But tonight I would sit on my porch, read the words of one of my literary heroes, and appreciate how far we'd all come from that terrible day when I'd found a stranger selling my belongings on my front lawn. Justice had been served not just through legal proceedings and public accountability, but through the lasting changes that had taken root in our community. That was the most satisfying revenge of all. Not the downfall of those who had wronged me, but the uprising of a community determined to do better. As Baldwin himself once wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." Pinehurst had finally faced its demons, and in doing so had begun to change for the better, and I, Devon Williams, had found my voice, my purpose, and my home in the process.